In today's episode, I want to address a concern that has been brought to me continuously since January 1st of 2025. You know what? That might be 2, 3 weeks of exaggeration, but most assuredly, after President Trump was sworn into office for the second term, there have been some radical changes in the government, specifically with the IRS. Although, I will admit, that's not the only government agency that's been affected. So, the concern that keeps being brought to me is whether or not the IRS is going to go away.
Welcome to the Tax Relief with Timalyn Bowens podcast. Are you behind on taxes? Is the IRS threatening you or your business? Are you overwhelmed and confused about how to resolve your tax issues? Let's join Timalyn as she explains your options and how she may be able to help. Timalyn Bowens is America's favorite EA.
Hey, family. Welcome to episode 59 of the Tax Relief with Timalyn Bowens podcast. In today's episode, I want to address a concern that has been brought to me continuously since January 1st of 2025. You know what? That might be 2, 3 weeks of exaggeration, but most assuredly, after President Trump was sworn into office for the second term, there have been some radical changes in the government, specifically with the IRS. Although, I will admit, that's not the only government agency that's been affected. So, the concern that keeps being brought to me is whether or not the IRS is going to go away. So, as things have been changing, cuts have been made, people have been fired, I thought to myself, is the IRS going away? But then I had to remember the IRS is the accounts receivable department of the United States government. The majority of funding that we have to, yes, I know it's a touchy subject, but fund the military, that is coming through taxes that the IRS collects. Then I had to think about other government programs. And, we think about housing assistance, food assistance, and I understand people's concerns. Well, if funding is cut to those programs, we have lower spending, and then there's no need for the IRS. But folks, that simply isn't true. Listen. Each year, there is something called the income tax gap. So, based on the amount of people in the US working, there is an estimated number that the IRS should be collecting in income taxes each year. The income tax gap is the difference between the number they should have collected and what they actually did. Even if there were no more tax returns because of the income tax gap from prior years, the IRS would still be needed to collect those funds. So check this out, right? I wouldn't be as concerned about the IRS going away versus the viability of the IRS. And when I say the viability of the IRS, I mean its ability to actually continue successfully, and we haven't quite seen seamless in a while, but I'll say efficiently. Okay. So a lot of people were concerned when the Inflation Reduction Act passed under the Biden administration because it had initially allotted $80 billion to be given to the IRS over a span of 10 years, right? It also gave the IRS the green flag, or the green light rather, to hire more people. Now, Remember, as an enrolled agent, my license is through the Internal Revenue Service. I don't work for the Internal Revenue Service. So when taxpayers have a debt that they cannot pay, they hire me to represent them before the IRS. If we have a taxpayer who is going under an audit, or maybe uh, they've been hit with a levy, so their bank account was cleared out of a certain amount, or they had a garnishment of their wages. They hire me to do that representation. So it's fair to say I work with the IRS every week on behalf of those clients. What happened when that $80 billion was allocated? Of course, like I said, it's over 10 years. But what happened was we started to see better systems within the IRS. And when I say that, this is what I mean. Sometimes we could have a situation where a taxpayer would owe the IRS, we would get some type of arrangement made with the collections department, right? But the levy program is an automated levy program. So once the process has stopped, somebody has to manually go in there to stop it. Okay. So you would think that if I'm representing somebody and I'm calling them to set up an arrangement, that would automatically stop any levy. The person right there on the phone should be able to do it, right? That wasn't always the case. The computer systems within the IRS were, and some yet are, dinosaurs. Each department's computer systems didn't talk to the other departments within the IRS. So it made things very clunky and somewhat difficult to get done when working with the IRS. When the allocation of that money came and they started actually receiving funds, guess what happened? We had technology updates. There are now tools where the taxpayer themselves can send things to the IRS that are missing on their return. They can do it electronically without having to mail it in. Now, with that, you may think, well, Timlin, that sounds like you're no longer needed. That's the idea. For certain tax situations, they shouldn't require representation. However, because the IRS was so behind on technology, taxpayers are the ones who were hurt by that and they had to get somebody else on their team. Okay? Now, there most definitely are situations that call for representation that are more complex dealing with the tax law, which is why it's amazing that you as a taxpayer have the right to tax representation, because you shouldn't have to be a tax law expert to not be taken advantage of by the IRS. That's when you would want to go ahead and get somebody to represent you in an audit when you've been levied, because you don't know what you don't know and you want to be at the best advantage. So, with that, it appeared things were going well as far as the efficiency of the IRS. Some people didn't agree with that, and the loudest people I've seen speak on this are folks who don't typically have issues with the IRS. Now, when President Trump came into office this term, one of the first things that he did was to put a halt to hiring anyone else within the IRS. Okay? So here's the thing: technology is awesome, it makes things more efficient, more seamless, but there's a period where people have to be trained. You don't just learn those things overnight, right? So if we were hiring new people, and in addition, hiring new people, implementing a new system, you have folks that may do well with the system, but they don't understand the tax law and how to do things yet, right? So there's a little bit of a learning gap, but it was okay because things were yet efficient. Next, what we see is the Trump administration says, okay, we don't need all these folks here. Now, keep in mind, a large Not huge, a nice chunk, less than 50%, more than 20% of IRS employees are set to retire within the next 3 years, right? So those folks are already going out the door. However, the Trump administration said, you know what? Let's go ahead and make some cuts now. So what we had was the deferred retirement, and then we had some people that were just laid off. So here we see another bottleneck issue happening within the IRS. Is the IRS going away? No, but are they going to be as efficient in helping the taxpayer? No, because now they've had resources taken away from them. That initial 80 billion over 10 years has been drastically cut to 40 billion. And in addition to not having funding, they've also lost people. So, where does that leave you, the taxpayer? As I mentioned before, you do have the right to representation. However, even with that right to representation, this is going to be a new era in time where it's not even going to be as easy for EAs such as myself, CPAs, and tax attorneys to advocate for you as a taxpayer because, number one, those technology updates weren't all completed. So there are things that you can do on your side on the IRS website as a taxpayer that we as professionals can't yet do to help you. That is going to make the process a little bit more difficult. One of the things when I go to DC annually for what I call the NAEA fly in, right? I talk to my congressman, talk to my senator about how these things are affecting their constituents. I hope that none of you all are ever in a situation where you responded to the IRS, but they keep sending you letters as if you never sent anything. If you are in a situation like that, feel free to book a call to see if we'd be a good fit to work with each other so Bowen's Tax Solutions can take care of that debt for you. But the warning I want to give here with the concern of whether or not the IRS is going to go away, I've had people ask me, how serious should I take this debt? Our federal debt is forever increasing. As I said, the IRS is the accounts receivable department for the United States government. We had some downtime in the beginning of the year where they weren't doing quite as much enforcement, but I would say around Valentine's Day is when I saw them starting to get aggressive again in the same manner that they did before COVID. So, with that, I would say get your tax house in order because here's the issue that I've been running into. If you get levied, that is a nightmare. Typically, we'd be able to reach out same day and say, hey, here's a payment arrangement. We need the levy removed. And then we get you into a situation where you're yet paying the debt, but you are managing your cash flow. Now, what's happening is taxpayers may be levied, but then there's nobody that can be reached at the IRS, or maybe the taxpayer who was levied was assigned to a revenue officer, and now that revenue officer no longer works with the Internal Revenue Service. You don't want to find yourself in that situation. So if you are facing a tax debt that you cannot pay in full, my advice to you is to find the payment arrangement that best suits you that will satisfy the IRS and not put you out. Okay? And when I say put you out, I mean, this not going to bankrupt you. There are going to be situations, and I'm saying this realistically. I don't want to paint a fairy tale for you. There will be situations where the payment that you have to make to the IRS is going to be uncomfortable. That's not everyone's story, but you won't know what it is until you get that transcript investigation and actually do the financials to see what the IRS thinks that you can afford to pay. All right. Now, I've talked about that in previous episodes. Okay. With the 433F, I've talked about the transcript investigation. If you're interested in learning more about those, I will link them in the show notes. But I hope you found this episode helpful because I'm on a personal mission to fill the tax literacy gap one taxpayer at a time. So even if it's not me, just make sure that you get the help that you need. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to listen today. I'd like to thank Jim Ray Consulting Services for helping me get this message out to you. I hope you found the information helpful. Did you know 1 in 50 people have a tax problem? Please share this episode with your friends and family because you never know who may need help. Again, thanks for listening. Hey, just as a reminder, this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only. It provides a framework and possible solutions for solving your tax problems, but it is not legally binding. Please consult your tax professional regarding your specific tax situation.